I wanted you to hear how the red heifer story began, because it's really extraordinary and a lot of people don't hear this part of the story. Some of you know the recent events regarding the 5 red heifers that were flown from the Texas ranches to the JFK airport and then to Israel, and it happened in September at the time of Rosh Hashanah in 2022. But this group, Building Israel, which is Bona Israel in Hebrew.com, 5 red heifers have been brought to Israel from Texas, and they are currently building a research and educational center in ancient Shiloh, which is Shiloh to us, where the heifers will be kept. Visitors will be able to see the heifers as well as experience and learn about the mitzvah commandment of the red heifers. The site will also serve as a research center where a team of researchers and rabbis will explore the possibilities to breed other pure red heifers. So in case you don't know, that's where the Mishkan, or the tabernacle of Moses, was set up for, I don't know, it was something like 400 years or something. So it was there for a mighty long time with the Ark of the Covenant within, and so this is where they're going to put the red heifers. Now, I had a thought about this, and I'm thinking that the covenant with many for 1:7, and because that's going to cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease halfway through after 3.5 years, and since they are saying that the Messiah is the one that they hope will perform that ceremony of the red heifer, then wouldn't it make sense that the covenants are usually blood covenants? And it seems to me that the covenant with many would be something having to do with the red heifer sacrifice by a proclaimed Messiah that's the false Messiah. And then he allows the temple to be built, but then halfway through he breaks that lease and breaks that covenant so that the sacrifices can no longer be performed. So a covenant is something different than just a peace treaty. I've never thought that the covenant with many was a peace treaty, and I don't know where pastors are getting that. It's a covenant. By definition, is a binding agreement. In literal sense, a covenant means a binding agreement, a legal contract. It is a seal between 2 or more parties. In a biblical sense, the word covenant derives from the same root word meaning to cut. This means that the culture of the Bible, covenant carried weight and was often cut or sealed in blood. So, to me, the covenant with many in Daniel's prophecy very likely has to do with the king that's going to be appointed, that is the anointed one that they call their Messiah, performing the blood sacrifice there in a space that they've already created on the Mount of Olives. They've already purchased a parcel of land, the rabbis have, a certain rabbi, and that is where they're going to perform this sacrifice of the red heifer. And they're saying that they now believe, it was reported in CBN News a little while ago, that they're saying that it will be performed more than likely Passover of 2024 to Shavuot of 2024. Which means that the king has to be in place by then, which all lines up. And a covenant is also considered to be a sacred agreement. So the red heifer that's supposed to purify the Jews because they are walking around unpurified, according to what they believe. They believe that the ashes of the red heifer will purify them. So anyway, nobody needs to go off about all of that, but it's just like the circumcision is a blood covenant, and it was a covenant between God and his people. So the red heifer is a covenant between God and his people, and if they are expecting the Messiah, the anointed one, to perform this red heifer ceremony, then I can see that that would be the time of the covenant with many. And it would be a blood covenant of the red heifer. And this is something nobody's presented, and I'm presenting it because the Lord is just unveiling things left and right now. Personally, I think everybody's kind of missed the true meaning of covenant, and that this will be something that the false Messiah, which they think is the Messiah, is going to perform for the Jewish people to purify them. So it all makes sense if you look at the covenant with many from that angle, instead of thinking it's the Abraham Accords, a peace covenant, or just a security issue. It will be a blood covenant. And I just think it's really incredible, because if you think about the fact that I was telling you that they're going to put a king upon that throne, and Daniel wrote the prophecy as royalty of the same tribe of Judah, and that is the revived monarchy in the end. And they believe that that king they put upon the throne, if they allow him to perform that ceremony on the Mount of Olives, that very well could be the covenant with many that he performs in blood, with the red heifer's blood. And that would allow the covenant between God and his people supposedly to purify them from their sin, because they're walking around in sin. But of course we know they've rejected the true king, which is God himself, coming in the flesh to purify the people with his own blood. And by the way, the blood and water came forth out of Messiah's side at the crucifixion. The red heifer sacrifice is considered a water purification. So when the disciples saw the blood and water come out of his side, they recognized this was the fulfillment of that. And the red heifers were just a type and shadow of the Messiah who was going to come and fulfill that. But they have rejected him, and they're going to have an earthly king, and they're going to have him perform the covenant with many, I believe. And that will be in the red heifer's blood. So the water purification for their sin. Okay, so I'm just trying to explain everything that the Lord is revealing, and it's pretty amazing. But you have not probably even heard how this whole story with the red heifers began. And I wanted to say something right here because it's pretty stunning. You know, when we think about Jesus saying that when he returns, it'll be like the days of Noah and like the days of Lot, we go back in the scriptures and we read what was going on then, but we don't think about things happening in our day that are actually projecting those same things. Like, for example, the Noahide laws, you know, like they're trying to bring something back and put people under this yoke of the Noahide laws that is in their Talmud, their Babylonian Talmud. We are not under that. We are under Jesus, the Messiah's covenant in his blood and his water purification. And so all of this is going to come about because they have not accepted him as their king. So there's new people that are involved in this Red Heifer project. Building Israel, or Bona Israel, is involved in that project. And I think there's another man named Stinson or something like that. And he's involved in it. But I want to tell you how this all began, because this is going to blow your mind and give you the chills. Frontline, this was written by Lawrence Wright, and It was written some time ago when this whole red heifer thing began. But I want you to hear this because it just blew my mind so much. It's titled, Forcing the End. Why do a Pentecostal cattle breeder from Mississippi and an Orthodox rabbi from Jerusalem believe that a red heifer can bring change? Now, this was back when Rabbi Chaim Richman was the director of the Temple Institute, and he came here several times to Colorado. I got to meet him and briefly talked to him and his wife, and later on he came and I met his son, and his son seemed like one of the most snooty people I've ever met. I couldn't even get a word in edgewise with his son, but I mean, he was really nice to talk to and everything. And he was talking before a Messianic congregation. Then I went up there to visit because I wanted to hear what he had to say. If you don't think we're living in the days of Lot and Noah, listen to this. This is how the whole red heifer thing started. In the spring of 1989, a Pentecostal preacher named Clyde Lott was thumbing through the Bible, looking up all the references to cows. This wasn't so odd, given that Lott is one of the leading cattle breeders in the Southeast. At the time, he specialized in raising show cattle for youngsters involved in 4-H clubs and the Future Farmers of America. His office in Canton, Mississippi contains many ribbons, plaques, and trophies, including awards for 2 national championships in judging and showmanship. As it happens, the Old Testament is full of references to cows and cattle. It is, after all, a history of an agricultural people. And the Lord said, "The cattle on 1,000 hills are mine," saith the Lord. When Lot turned to Numbers 19, he read one of the many conversations that God had with Moses and his brother Aaron as they led the Jews through the desert towards the promised land. Quote, "Speak unto the children of Israel," the Lord commanded, "that they bring thee a red heifer without spot, wherein is no blemish, and upon which never came a yoke." And this is why Jesus said, "My yoke is easy, and my burden is light." "The cow will be given to a priest to slay," the Lord continued, "and burned on a pyre of cedar, hyssop, and a strand of scarlet thread. Then the ashes of the heifer will be mixed with water and used to purify those who have been exposed to death. Anyone who fails to be purified shall be cut off from among the congregation, because he hath defiled the sanctuary of the Lord." This is one of the most mysterious injunctions in the Bible. Even King Solomon, who was said to understand the meaning of all things, could not explain the reason for the red heifer. Clyde Lott didn't understand it either. He also wondered where the children of Israel could have obtained a red cow. From his own reading, he had concluded that the Old Testament herd was descended from the cattle that Jacob, the son of Isaac, had received in wages from his uncle Laban. Those animals, as described in King James Bible, were speckled, spotted, and brown. Your speckled and spotted cattle basically are recognized as a purebred cow, like a Holstein, Lot says. So where did the spotless red heifer come from? Genetically, it didn't add up, and yet the Lord had specified that this was the only way for the Israelites to cleanse themselves and participate in the worship of God. I didn't recognize then that God always sent to Israel at the time that she needed it, the cow, the man with the red heifer. Lot, who was 42 at the time, was a soft-spoken southern gentleman, squarely built, with a full fleshy face and curly brown hair that was beginning to gray. Although he was ordained in the ministry of the National Pentecostal Assemblies of Jesus Christ, he does not pastor his own church. I would fit more in the category of evangelist going on the road and preaching or teaching, he says. Like all fundamentalist Christians, Lot believes that the Messiah will come again. His view of the end time is that Jesus' return will usher in 1,000 years of peace and harmony. Before that, however, there will be 7 years of tribulation. The Antichrist will appear, and the forces of good and evil will wage a cataclysmic struggle, culminating in Jesus' defeat of the false Messiah. So basically, you're having the good and evil right there in Jerusalem, and it's going to be this big end-time battle between Satan and God right there in Jerusalem. So that's the Scarlet Harlot, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. Before that, however, there will be 7 years of tribulation. The Antichrist will appear, and the forces of good and evil will wage the cataclysmic struggle, culminating in Jesus' defeat of the false Messiah. Many evangelicals believe that Jews and other non-Christians will suffer for accepting the Antichrist as their Messiah, that most of them will perish in the coming struggle. But those who survive will finally acknowledge Christ as their Savior. True Christians will be spared these catastrophes because they will have been raptured, snatched directly into heaven before the troubles begin. They will return to act as priests during Christ's millennial reign. At the end of that time, Satan will rally the forces of evil for a final confrontation with Jesus and the saints of the church at the Battle of Armageddon. And where is that going to take place? But Israel. So this is another reason why it's not happening in America or New York City. The satanic warriors led by a prince named Gog will come from the north from a land called Magog, which Lot believes could be a satellite republic of the former Soviet Union. But as I showed, they have the oak trees in London, England, Gog and Magog, and also in the Lord Mayor's Parade, the inner London that's within London, where they keep the effigies of Gog and Magog. And they showed King Charles III standing under an English oak tree. So, is it possible he becomes their king, their anointed one, and then he's also Gog? So, they say that Gog could be the same person as the Antichrist. And we know that the Antichrist spirit has just reared its ugly head with the ultra-Orthodox Jews in the Knesset. So, them wanting to silence the gospel and Jesus' message of salvation. It says, God will destroy them, however. The dead will rise for their day of judgment, and a new Jerusalem will descend from the sky. Once again, God will dwell among his people. A longing for the rapture and the return of Jesus on earth is at the core of evangelicalism. The fact that we are coincidentally approaching a millennial milestone in the human calendar certainly adds to this yearning and to the sense of anticipation felt by believers of all faiths. Most fundamentalists assume that we are living on the edge of human history in any case, and that modern events in the Middle East are fulfillments of prophecies made some 2,000 years ago by Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and John, among others. These prophecies require 3 great events before the Messiah can return. The nation of Israel must be restored. Jerusalem must be a Jewish city. Check, check. And the temple, the center of worship and sacrifice in the ancient Jewish world, which was last destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, must be rebuilt. 2 of these conditions have been met in the last 50 years. As Lot read the Bible that day, he realized that the second coming and the fate of humankind now depended on the red heifer. In order for the Jews to rebuild the temple and prepare the way for the return of the Messiah, they must be purified with the ashes of a red heifer. A qualified red heifer has not been found in Israel in almost 2,000 years, and yet red cattle are not really so unusual in the U.S. A breed known as the Red Angus is as red as an Irish setter. It occurred to Lot that God, who he believed had directed the evangelist's own success in the show ring, was now guiding his hand in a much larger matter. Where was the red heifer to come from? That was the question we couldn't answer, says Lot, who sometimes uses the first person plural when referring to himself. It plagued us day in and day out for months. Finally, in the latter part of the summer of 1990, as he was baling hay, a piece of equipment broke, and he started to drive into town to get a spare part. But then he found himself driving to Jackson, the state capital, and walking into the office of Roy D. Manning, the Director of International Trade for the Mississippi Department of Agriculture and Commerce. I will never forget it as long as I live, walking into Mr. Manning's office that day, and just the cold shock on his face of seeing someone coming out of the hayfield, blue jeans, tennis shoes, baseball cap, dirty and smelly, and walking into his office unannounced and saying, "I have read the Bible, and the Bible says Israel has to have a red heifer." Lot said later in one of his many testimonials to evangelical congregations in the South, for some reason he didn't kick me out of his office. Instead, Manning wrote a letter to an attaché at the American Embassy in Athens who was in charge of agricultural exports to the Middle East. "We have been approached by a producer and seller of cattle from the state of Mississippi," and I am quoting him in the following. Manning wrote, and the letter went on, quote, "Red Angus cattle suitable for Old Testament biblical sacrifices will have no blemish or off-color hair. Genetically red will reproduce red. Eye, nose pigmentation will be dark. Heifers at a year old will weigh approximately 600 to 700 pounds. These cattle will adapt quickly to Middle Eastern climate. Also excellent beef quality." Manning's letter was bounced to a State Department official, who rerouted it to the American Embassy in Tel Aviv, where it was forwarded to the Israeli Ministry of Religious Affairs. Someone there eventually thought to send it to the Temple Institute, a private organization of religious Jews in Jerusalem who suspect, like Lot, that the end time may be near and are dedicated to rebuilding the temple. The letter arrived on the desk of Rabbi Chaim Richman 90 days after Manning posted it. The Temple Institute operates a small museum in the Jewish quarter of the Old City. A visitor steps down into a basement room that houses the collection and a bookstore. One of the books on display is The Mystery of the Red Heifer, Divine Promise of Purity by Rabbi Richman. Also on display is a scale model of the sacrificial altar and replicas of the decanters and lavers used in the temple service. The flaxen robes of the priests have been carefully reproduced, along with the trumpets, harps, and lyres that the Levites are said to have played in the courtyard of the temple. You woke up in the morning to the sound of music from the temple. You went to bed to the sound of music from the temple. A guide tells visitors, any beautiful building you ever saw cannot compare with the beauty of the temple. That's so exciting to me as a musician, that there was always music from morning till night. And I love that, being a musician myself. But the goal of the Institute is not only to restore the temple itself, but to reinstate the priestly caste, clerical rule, and animal sacrifice that characterized the nation of Israel as the dawn of the Iron Age. To secular Israelis, this sounds like a Jewish version of the Taliban, and yet the construction of a third temple is essential to the view that many Orthodox Jews have of salvation and the coming of the Messiah. Okay, so they have viewed the gospel in an antichrist spirit, and this is their view of their salvation. So they're going to have the Messiah, the king that they anoint, perform the red heifer ceremony. And I do believe that the Holy Spirit's revealing that right now, that that is the covenant with many. And it's many in Israel. So that they will be able to, like right now, they don't want them to go up on the temple because they're afraid they're going to step on the Holy of Holies and they are not purified. So they want to perform this ceremony so that the Jews can once again go up and perform the temple service. And let me just continue here. Without the temple, there's no way to fulfill many of the religious obligations, such as ritual sacrifices that the Torah requires. In Orthodox theology, that means that all Jews are stuck in a state of impurity and are therefore unable to be in the presence of God. When a glass is broken at a Jewish wedding, it is done in memory of the destruction of the temple. That also symbolizes to me that they were, they were the wife of God, and they committed fornication against God as the scarlet harlot, and the Lord has taken a bride for himself amongst the Gentiles because they didn't want to come to the wedding. So they're trying to create their own thing, thinking this is going to bring about the restoration of the temple, which is symbolized in the Jewish wedding in its destruction. So that's very interesting in itself. And the Holy Temple in Judaism is so important and primary that it can really be said that Judaism, as it is practiced today, is not the vehicle that God intended it to be, Richmond says. The prophets of Israel emphasize the fact that the temple is really much more than just a synagogue. The temple is actually the device through which God manifests his presence to mankind. Naturally, the name Lot caught the attention of the rabbis at the Institute, and not just because another Lot from Mississippi happened to be the United States Senate Majority Leader at the time. Genesis recounts the story of Abraham's nephew Lot, whose wife became a pillar of salt when she disobeyed the Lord and turned to look back on Sodom as it was being destroyed. Can this be part of the reason why Jerusalem is called Sodom? And the things with Egypt that she's implementing with the medical stuff, because part of that has to do with Egypt. And by the way, I did call the company Novo Nordisk that creates the needles that go on the insulin pens, and I told them that I was offended by that Egyptian bull on there, and she explained to me that it is the Egyptian bull god Apis on the box. That's their symbol for diabetics. Okay? That's just crazy. The reason being is that they got the insulin somehow from the cow udders or something. So they made that their symbol. Can you believe that in our day and age? Rabbi Richmond told me that Lot was a Gentile, and he was a very, very good cattle breeder, Clyde Lot said. You think we're living in the days of Lot? Now, hearing this, the rabbis thought that the coincidence was a good sign. After an excited exchange of letters and telephone calls between Jerusalem and Canton, Lot went to Jerusalem to meet with the rabbis. I really didn't know what to expect, he told me. I came out of a religious background that taught that Jewish people were ignorant and lost and this kind of thing, and he was dazzled by the temple artifacts that the members of the Institute had reconstructed. You can just imagine having read all your adult life about the temple and the tabernacle and the vessels, and finally seeing them firsthand. That was amazing to me, and it was a life-changing experience. Lot tried to explain his own beliefs to his hosts. We talked about Jesus and the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues. They knew where we were coming from. The rabbis were impressed by Lot's sincerity. This is a person without guile, Richmond, who was born in America and immigrated to Israel in 1982, concluded. Richmond took Lot on a tour of the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. Over the next several days, he gave the Pentecostal evangelist an education in the Jewish oral tradition and the voluminous commentaries on the enigmatic commandment of the red heifer Jewish law, which is called halakha, maintains that all Jews today are impure because of their direct or indirect contact with the dead. For that reason, observant Jews may not go to parts of the Temple Mount, lest they step on the Holy of Holies, the spot where the Ark of the Covenant, holding the fragments of the stone tablets containing the 10 Commandments, resided until it was supposedly lost during the Babylonians' destruction of the first temple in 586 BC. According to the rabbis, the only way that Jews could become pure again was by being sprinkled with the ashes of a red heifer that has been mixed with water traditionally drawn from the pool of Siloam. According to the Mishnah, the written version of the oral tradition, the ceremony of the red heifer sacrifice has only been performed 9 times in the history of the Jewish people. When the 10th red heifer appears, the Messiah will finally come. Well, so I'm telling you that on the cross, the water purification in the blood came out of the Messiah's side. And this was a sign, and the disciples acknowledged and were shocked when they saw this happen. And there's 3 that testify: the water, the blood, and the Spirit. Down here on earth and up in heaven, water, blood, and spirit. The rabbis, for their part, learned something about cattle. Lot interpreted the reference in Numbers 19 to a cow without spot or blemish to mean that it is a good milking, sweetly disposed, handsomely constructed animal. Basically, a 21st century high-tech cow. Lot could see for himself that the entire Israeli ranching industry was depressed and behind the times. It occurred to him that without modern breeding techniques and champion red Angus stock, he could produce not just one red heifer, but an entire herd. As Lot likes to tell evangelical audiences, one of the rabbis wanted to know how many red cows it would take to produce in Israel the kind of heifer described by Numbers 19. Approximately 200 cows, Lot said. How much per cow? Of this extremely high quality, about $2,000 a head. When Richmond translated the figure into Hebrew, it caused a heated response among the other rabbis. Lot asked what was wrong. $20,000 a head is a lot of money, Richmond said. We didn't say 20,000, we said 2,000, Lot replied. We're not trying to take advantage of you as you seek to turn back to God. This response brought expressions of amazement to the faces of the rabbis. Richmond explained to Lot that in the time of the Second Temple, a jewel from the breastplate of the high priest had fallen off. A delegation of priests journeyed to the town of Ashkelon to the house of a well-known jeweler named Dema ben Natina, and he agreed to replace the jewel for 100 shekels. But he said that he could not do it immediately because the replacement was in a box that was under the bed where his father was sleeping. The priest thought this was merely a bargaining ploy and doubled the price. The jeweler again refused, and the priest continued to offer more money and reached the sum of 1,000 shekels. But when the jeweler remained adamant, the delegation angrily started off on the road back to the temple. At last, the jeweler's father awakened. Dema ben Natina got the jewel and raced after the delegation, catching up with it in a grove. When a priest handed him 1,000 shekels, the jeweler would accept only the 100 that he had agreed to. I'm not trying to take advantage of you as you are seeking to turn to God, he said. When Lot heard this story, he was deeply moved. It was word for word the same thing we said 2,500 years later, he later recalled. Right there in that grove, they prayed a blessing over Dama ben Natina, a Gentile, and the blessing was that out of your Gentile lineage, one day when Israel needs it, will come the producer of the red heifer. Wow. And his name was Lot. In the fall of 1994, Richmond went to Mississippi to examine 4 freshly washed and groomed heifers that Lot had produced for his inspection. The Talmud states that even 2 hairs that are not red would be enough to disqualify a candidate. One of the cows immediately caught Richmond's eye. He did not even look at the 3 others, Lot recalls. He walked into the pen with that heifer tied to the back of the stall, and he just stopped for a few minutes to appraise her from one end to the other. Then he walked right up to that heifer within a matter of inches, and he looked down at her. Then he went back 4 or 5 times and just stared at her. Finally, Richmond placed his hand on the animal which Lot's daughter, who was then 6, had named Dixie. "This is the heifer that will change the world," Richmond said. And you're not going to believe this. I just discovered something. You know, that term, the song Dixie, you know that song? Do you know that song, Down in South? I'm just kind of blown away because something just happened as I was talking about this. The Lord just did something right here, right now, while I'm reading. Something just happened as I am recording this. The Lord brought forth something. I am shocked to discover this. And I don't even think Mr. Lot or Reverend Lot, the cattle breeder, or Rabbi Richmond knew this at the time. But I am going to reveal something that's really stunning about this. Well, that red heifer's name was Dixie. You know the old Southern song, "I wish I was in the land of cotton, old times there and not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland where I was born, early on one frosty morn. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixieland I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie." Well, the red heifer's name was Dixie. You know what it means? You're not going to believe this. Dixie happens to be derived from the French word dix, D-I-X, meaning 10. Dixie directly translates to 10th. This baby name may be associated with a decade, but it's also commonly recognized as a region in the United States known as the Old South. It means 10, 10th. They are going to sacrifice the 10th red heifer. And this red heifer's name was Dixie, meaning 10th. I'm not even sure that they knew that because they sure didn't mention it in any of the articles that I read. I don't even know if they know. Oh my word, that is unbelievable. That is incredible. And the Lord just showed me that as I was reading the article about the little girl being 6 years old and the cow was named Dixie. There's a lot of historical information about the recapturing of Jerusalem in this article. But can you believe that that red heifer's name meant 10th? I am stunned. Okay, so if Lot in the 10th, Dixie weren't enough for you, oh man, we've got to be right at the cusp of eternity. In August 1996, a surprising development occurred. Another red calf was born, this time in Israel, on a farm outside Heifer run by a religious high school. I had some doubts about it from the very beginning, says Rabbi Shmeria Shor, whose son came running to him with the news of the birth. But I saw that she was very red, and I couldn't see hairs of any other color, so I ended up contacting some rabbinical authorities, and some people from Jerusalem eventually came. The rabbis examined the calf, which Shor had named Slil, a name that means a musical note, but which he translated as melody. And of course, melody means song or tune. To Shore's amazement, the rabbis pronounced Melody a qualified red heifer, despite the fact that he had begun to notice a few stray white hairs around her tail and udder, and her eyebrows, which had started out red and turned black. Also, the calf would not qualify as a heifer for 2 years. And by then, many other imperfections might come to light. I decided to play along in order to downplay it, he says now. The rabbis carried the news of the miraculous birth back to Jerusalem, and soon a pilgrimage of Orthodox Jews and international press seeking the holy heifer from Heifer began, turning up in the small religious community of Kfar Hasidim, where Melody now resided under armed guard. No red heifer, it was said, had been born in Israel since the destruction of the temple. It is written that it is the 10th red heifer that the Messiah will discover, and here we have the 10th heifer, one of the rabbis said on Israel radio. But it was Dixie whose name meant 10th. That is stunning. Muslims and majority of Jews reacted in alarm. A columnist for Haaretz called for the cow to be shot immediately and every molecule destroyed. The potential harm from this heifer is far greater than the destructive properties of a regular terrorist bomb. David Landau wrote, even Rabbi Shore cautioned that the time had not come to rebuild the temple, but Melody was creating her own reality. Jewish longing for the temple, Christian hopes for the rapture, and Muslim paranoia about the destruction of the mosques were being stirred to an apocalyptic boil. In any case, she solved the problem herself by growing a white tail, Rabbi Shore says now. No longer kosher, Melody has rejoined the herd, but she is pregnant, Shore says, by a reddish bull. The Reverend Lot had been suspicious of Melody's qualifications, but the episode alerted him and Rabbi Richmond to the sensational political consequences of their project. Nevertheless, on the eve of the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av in 1997, coincidentally, the day on which the destruction of both the first and second temples is commemorated, Lot, Richmond, and a group of West Bank settlers reached an agreement to provide land to raise red cattle. Lot and Richmond are partners, but in the event that Lot is raptured with the church, Richmond and the settlers will assume entire control of the operation. And it said this December they were planning to ship 500 pregnant cows to the Jordan Valley. The cattle are being bred in Nebraska on a 3,000-acre spread devoted to red Angus. There seems to be little doubt that a red heifer that meets all the halakhic criteria will soon be born in Israel, possibly early next year. Land that Lot has found is in the occupied West Bank, or Judea, Samaria, some of the most hotly contested land in the world. He admitted recently to a revival audience in Gulf Shores, Alabama. It's going to require feedlots, slaughterhouses, a whole new economy. He will also ship frozen embryos from Dixie and other donor cows, along with the select sperm of the bulls, to be held in a safekeeping until the tribulation. According to Lot, his efforts will ensure that in the first 1 or 2 or 3 decades of the millennial reign, Israel will be able to go into the tanks, pull out those frozen embryos, and place them in cows. And in 1 generation, whatever they lost in the tribulation, they will have the very best cows on the face of the earth. She will be able to get the rest of the world back on its feet again, agriculturally, from a livestock point of view. Jerusalem makes a cult of holiness, one that fuels the passion and yearning of millions for a personal encounter with God. In the Old Testament, time and time again, it says, this is God's house. This is where God dwells. This Father Jerome Murphy O'Connor of New Testament at École Biblique et École Archéologique François in Jerusalem. Okay, I haven't brushed up on French. That's the best I can do. The assumption was that God's power and protection were most efficacious in this place. Hence the importance of pilgrimage to Jerusalem, pilgrimage to the temple. For centuries, believers have streamed into the city in order to bathe in this sense of divinity and to marvel at the sight that all three religions believe will be the place of the last judgment. And might I say, when it's talking about Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots, it says that when she had the deadly wound in the head by a sword and yet lived, and I told you and expressed that that was the ancient people of Israel and the ancient monarchy, that God brought a sword against them, and now it's being revived and they're going to put a new king on the throne. Well, when it says that people have come there and marveled, it says that people will be marveling that this deadly wound was healed. People will be flocking there because they're transfixed on Jerusalem, on the revived monarchy. On that day, both evangelical Christians and Orthodox Jews expect their Messiah to stride down from the Mount of Olives and burst through the Golden Gate. Many Muslims believe that now you got to hear this, many Muslims believe that the Kaaba, the holiest place in Mecca, will be transported to Jerusalem, and that all the dead will meet again in the streets of the city. Abomination of desolation, anyone? Wow. As long as such mythologies are taken literally, the struggle for Jerusalem and the Temple Mount will never end. The religious carnage that has marked every era of this maddened city will continue, because whoever controls Jerusalem controls access to the sacred places. It is a way of owning God. Wow. I'm absolutely stunned about Dixie meaning 10th, because the article said nothing at all about the meaning of the name Dixie, or that it had a connection to the 10th, or the heifer, oh, her name means 10th. It just so happened this cow, some random cow in Mississippi, was named Dixie. Man, I hope you can see a little bit of the history now of how the red heifer, the whole story began with Lot. And we're in the days of Lot and the days of Noah, because the ultra-Orthodox want to impose the Noahide laws as if all of mankind is under the covenant of Noah that took place, and that came from the Babylonian Talmud. Their belief in having purification of their sin through the red heifer is fulfilled in Jesus the Messiah, but they have not accepted their king. And so now you see, I truly believe that God is trying to tell me that this is the blood covenant in Daniel. This is what the Messiah is going to perform, this ceremony, and make this covenant with many. And the Jewish people will claim this purification for their sin so that they can perform the temple sacrifice and the temple duties when it's built. They've also said that they can perform this ceremony before there's ever a temple. They were performing sacrifices way before a temple was built. So they don't need the temple there in order to perform it. It kind of comes first. You can see this lining up, can't you? I mean, you can see this king that they're going to accept from the so-called Davidic line going to be put on the throne. His coronation is coming in May. Israel's 75th birthday is coming in May. The UK people, Rishi Sunak and probably King Charles III, will attend that birthday party. Rabbi Ephraim Mervis was knighted by the king. All of this is lining up, and of course it was Donald Trump that declared Jerusalem the eternal capital of Israel, so that's already taken place. You know, 1967, when Jerusalem was recaptured, and it took this long for that to be declared. And the next thing is the reestablishment of the throne of David and that third temple. And before that, the red heifer sacrifice to purify the people so they can be pure to go into the temple and go up there on the Temple Mount to pray and all of that. So that explains to me why they don't want certain Jews to go up there and pray. Very interesting indeed. And I thought you probably had not heard this story, so it's a very important story to understand. And God, you just witnessed the Holy Spirit revealing things as I was speaking. And I am blown to smithereens by this. What do you think about this, people? So then we had this other group. Now, I don't know how they're connected, but they flew those 5 red heifers. 5 is the number of the Torah. So that's why they picked the 5 red heifers. And I'm just telling you that from my own knowledge of writing my book and everything. So this is extraordinary and stunning information that, you know, there hasn't been a lot of detail about the red heifers, but this tells a huge story that needs to be told. And adding something from the Holy Spirit that's mind-blowing. So I guess it's the Bona, or the Building Israel, that is working with this. They've set up these farms for these red heifers where they're protected by guards, and they're going to have this educational place in Shiloh, ancient Shiloh. Shiloh, it's Shiloh in Hebrew, I think. So this is where the tabernacle was, and people will be able to go visit this herd. It's extraordinary, and this is just one huge sign that we are so near Jesus coming for his church, his bride, that he took because his wife denied accepting him as their husband. So they'll have to go through the time of Jacob's trouble to figure it all out. And that's not going to be a pretty time. I hope you're blessed by my videos. I hope you'll like, subscribe, share, and please, please support my work. I do a lot of work that goes, you know, unpaid. I'm trying to survive, and I really could use your help. I know some people have donated, but it's usually like you'll see a thumbs up by 2 people, you know, 3 people, and that's it. And I'm coming up upon 12,000 subscribers. Got a few hundred to go, but considering that we're subtracting my subscribers for a long time, fighting the battle till the end. So anyway, it's extraordinary. I just knew you had to hear this because it's an extraordinary story showing that we are in the days of Lot and the days of Noah. And this sign of this 10th red heifer is extraordinarily shocking. All right, well, shalom for now. I'll see you in the next video. Stay tuned.